All right. Well, today we are joined by Karin Kirkpatirck, BC Liberal candidate for West Vancouver Capilano. This is Karin's first time running for public office, but it's not her first time in a leadership position. Karin has held executive positions in a handful of organizations here in BC, including the Real Estate Foundation of British Columbia, UBC's Sauder School of Business, and the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Most recently, Karin has served as the CEO of Family Services of Greater Vancouver. We're going to dive into that in a minute. An organization with 500 employees and 12 locations spread across Greater Vancouver. Today, we're excited to talk with Karin about the election, which is her first gig at this, what she sees is her niche in the legislature, and what she hopes to gain from this election. So thank you for being on the show today, Karin.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks very much for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
And I just want to correct one thing so Bridget Anderson doesn't get mad at me.
Sure, yes.
Is that I was on the board of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. I don't want anyone to think I was the head of.
Oh, I apologize. Okay. Well, although I'm sure you would be a great head.
Okay.
So you were on the board of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Okay, super. Now, Karin, this is your first time into politics, and you've jumped right into a heated snap election.
Yes.
What has it been like for you to go through this approach of having to go out and, I'm assuming you've done maybe some Zoom calls or door knocking or whatever you've been doing to sort of get your name out there?
Yes.
How has the experience been so far?
I'm over Zoomed right now. It's been challenging. We have Ralph Sultan, who has been a long-serving MLA in my riding.
Yeah.
And so trying to get my name out now without the ability to have events and to, attend people's parties and do those kinds of things, it's making it difficult. We also have, a large portion of seniors in my riding. They're not on those Zoom calls.
Right.
We don't have access to come in and see them because of the pandemic. So there's a lot of challenges. The the write-in ballots I'm concerned, are a challenge for us because
the mail-in ones.
The mail-in ballots, because they've gone out without candidates' names on them.
Right.
They went out before candidates were listed on the Elections BC site. I know that there are people writing Ralph Sultan's name in,
Really?
in my riding.
Oh dear.
Because they didn't know who I was. And so if there was
Can you make your middle name Ralph?
I guess I don't know. That might be some
change?
arm wrestling there. But so, there's going to be spoiled ballots. There's a whole number of issues, but getting out there and actually campaigning and door knocking, getting into apartment buildings where you might have otherwise been able to, have little events, and it's made it really difficult. And having, this very, very short period of time for a new candidate who doesn't have a machine in place in terms of who is my campaign manager and who is helping with communications and who is putting the signs up. And so scrambling to pull that together, it's been challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I went into this all having just come off of major shoulder surgery, so I haven't been able to use my right arm for the last 2 months. So, and I thought, I'm going to have all this time to get physio. And so, that's just my own personal challenge.
Oh my goodness.
But the timing was bad.
Wow, I wouldn't have known. Well, good for you. Well, Jack, your campaign manager, has been excellent, and I appreciate him getting you in here. Let's jump to the kind of elephant in the room.
You bet.
So we were actually going to have both yourself and Jane Thornthwaite, excuse me, on today's podcast. She wasn't able to make it, and I think largely due to what happened on Friday. So there was a video that we're going to post here. There was a video a clip that was that you were on with Jane and Andrew Wilkinson and a few other people from the BC Liberal Party, and there's some comments made about Beau and Ma. So we'll let the viewers sort of hear or listen to this clip right now.
Except for Bowen is, very pretty lady, and she knows that she's got it, and she knows how to get Ralph going. And this is my roast part for Ralph. Both Beau and Ma and Ralph were stuck on the couch together, very, very close together, for almost the entire time. We were supposed to be networking and all this, but Bowen knows how to get you.
But Karin, can you maybe I'll just leave that open. I'll open it up for you to comment, because obviously there's been a lot of drama around this.
Yeah, there has been. This has been soul crushing for me.
I bet.
I have worked, and it's quite emotional for me too. I have worked, all of my jobs have been to help and support women, to help deal with racism, discrimination. It was so fundamentally. I was actually, as I am now, almost tongue-tied. I was so shocked by the comments that were being made that I did not react the way that I would like to have reacted. Some people have said I was laughing, and I can guarantee you I was not laughing. I was at first just trying to process what was being said. And then I put my head down because I did not know what to do. And then I put my head up and it looked like I might be laughing. It was a nervous reaction. Sure. I really was in a position where I would like to have thought, if I was on the other side of that camera, that I would have behaved differently. And I've been beating myself up about it since it happened. I should have stopped it. I should have called it out when it happened. I don't have a time machine. If I did, I would change it. I can't. It was a moment in time where I didn't say something that I should have said.
Right.
The extenuating circumstances for me, and I certainly don't mean this to be an excuse, is that this is the first event I had ever done. I was nervous. I had been practicing my script all day. I didn't know the people on the call. So just in terms of getting to kind of where I was when this came out of left field at me, is I probably wasn't as steady on my feet as I normally would be. And so I apologize to to all of those people that were offended. It's just so not the person I am. And I'm so upset by it because I feel that it diminishes and takes away from all of the work that I've done in my career. The social media, which I knew I didn't want to look at when I got into politics anyways, is cruel. I'm called a bad mother, which to me, I think that's another issue about, are they calling the men that were on that call bad fathers?
Sure.
And was it my obligation, and I do think I have a higher level of responsibility because I was the only woman on the call to have stepped up and said something. But it is, I wish I had done something different. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of people, I think, who you look back and you go, gee, if it was me, I would have done, this, and this. I would have thought that about myself too. I made a mistake in time, and I wish I could change it. It was wrong. It was appalling. It was shocking. And it was horrible. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you've been able to express that, Karin, because I think what's been unfair is again, this is also not an excuse for the comments that Jane made, because I listened to them too. And I found out firsthand. I didn't find out from some second person. So I saw it, and I saw it raw. I didn't know the context. The context was, it was a roast event.
It was a roast for Ralph Sultan, and to be honest, this is the other piece that upsets me. He is such a gentleman. He's such a wonderful person, a statesman, and this has hurt him too. And so, but it was in the context of being a roast. It was completely appropriate with there's always you're playing around the edges a little bit, but with the people that roasted him prior to this, it was appropriate. It was funny, and it was a nice event. Right.
Yeah. So I think it's good to make sure we clear the air on that so that it's understood, because I think what's unfortunate from my observation, and look, I had Bo and Ma come in here. Unfortunately, the recording with Bowen was like, it didn't record. So it's so disappointing. But she's offered to come back in after the election's over. She's a great person. And I was really impressed. She's very well spoken. And as I've had other people like yourself come in, I'm like, what you see on Twitter and what you hear their opponents state about those people and what you realize about them when you meet them in person, I can't say that there's been anybody from any of the political lines of all the guests I've had in from both NDP, Liberals, and Greens that I could say they left and said, wow, that person's a real jerk. And it's unfortunate, Karin, and I'm glad you've been able to speak about this, because it's unfortunate that all the years of work you've done especially with the your latest this with your family services of Greater Vancouver, that all gets kind of swept under the rug because you happen to be in this clip on this video and you're the only other woman in the room. And I just think it's unfortunate people don't take a minute to just reflect on the fact that you can't judge a person based on some small clip. And I'm not trying to justify or defend Jane. I don't know Jane.
Yep.
But I think that if any mature adult were to look at this, go, we've all made mistakes in our lives. And I completely resonate with where you're coming from. Now, we are only about a week away, just a week and a half away from this election. We had the leaders' debate last night. This is your first go at any politics, from what I understand. Yeah. So maybe tell us a little bit, first of all, like what got you inspired to do this, and why are you running in the riding of West Vancouver Capilano?
That's a great question. So I've always been kind of on the peripheral of politics. I've been political. So I've been involved. I watch everything. I read everything. I want to know what's happening. I've been involved in helping other candidates in a variety of parties running campaigns before. And so I'm new to politics, but I'm not new to politics. I'm new as being a candidate. Yes. I've also run a Crown corporation, and I do a lot of work in my previous role with working directly with the province, with working on contracts and negotiations with the province. So I've kind of seen it from the inside as well. Yeah. So the question, why do I want to do this, is I feel I've got this very unique kind of basket of skills and experiences. And I really believe that I can bring some fresh ideas and some progressive ideas and really contribute to those policy conversations and make some good change and support good change that's already happening. So I was a little bit angry, and I think that when you get angry about something, you get motivated to do something about it.
What were you angry about?
And so, I'll tell you. For the last 3 years, running a social services organization, I have seen the NDP government cut funding to some really critical programs, including youth addiction programs, underfunding really important programs for domestic violence survivors and children who are involved in domestic violence. These are program cuts. You don't hear about them out in the community because it doesn't feel like that's an NDP thing to do, but we've struggled with it.
I would never have thought this type of government. I mean, they take a position that they are the most progressive when it comes to these types of services. So this is enlightening for me.
Yeah, no, there's some real issues with funding. And then the last thing is that really, not unlike the community benefits agreement, the NDP government made a conscious decision 2.5 years ago to fund unionized social services organizations at a higher wage rate than non-unionized social services organizations.
Really?
Delivering the exact same services, the people having the exact same qualifications. So that was the point where I just said, you know what, I really want to be in a place where I can have these conversations and draw these things to the attention of others and try and change some policy. So that was a long answer to your question.
That's a great one. And actually, I didn't realize that last point of that the BC NDP are giving more funding to social service providers that have union employees versus non-union. I've heard Andrew Wilkinson and the BC Liberals sort of promote the fact that John Horgan's only supporting his union friends. But this is actually a really tangible example of this. So I think you're referring to is what you experienced at Family Services of Greater Vancouver.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so maybe to use that as an example, let's first of all, for the listeners to understand, what is Family Services of Greater Vancouver? I mentioned that there's 500 employees, 12 locations.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about what it is.
Okay. I just need to do one of those qualifiers that I'm not speaking on behalf of Family Services.
No, and you're not involved with them anymore.
I'm not there anymore. This is, but I'm still involved in the sector, and this was across
We're talking about your
sector,
experience there.
Some challenges. So the kind of work that these organizations do is that hands-on, on the ground, working with street entrenched young people, working with people suffering from mental health, suicidal, trauma. It's the kind of elder abuse. So it's the kind of work that is so fundamental to who we are as Canadians and who we are as a society. Yeah. And so these are the kind of programs that I've just felt, and my experience really has been the last 4 years, has been since the NDP came in. I was not there prior to that, but my understanding, even from people within the ministries, is that there's a very different way of funding and not funding programs now. And so I also just want to clarify, I think unions are great, and they do really, really good work, and they have a very important part to play in the economy, and they've done great things for all of us. The concern and challenge I have is a government policy meant to influence what's happening and unionization. So actually the government is doing something that is almost forcing an organization to unionize. So it really doesn't have to do with the union itself. It's really the ideology that the government can do that.
Sure. Is this, Karin, is this an actual written policy, or is it kind of like a just a known, it's kind of a unwritten rule?
It's written. It is.
Yeah,
it's in the contracts, and there was a negotiated amount of money a few years ago, $60 million that was put aside that was supposed to help equalize social services employees to healthcare employees, because there is a differential there that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
So we all thought that we were going to benefit from that, and then it was at the last minute we were informed that it was only going to the unionized employees.
Well, we have decided we're going to cover a number of topics here. So we want to talk about what you can bring to the table from a leadership perspective, because I don't think there's a lot of MLAs or people who vying to become an MLA who can say that they've ran a company or an organization with 500 employees. That's very impressive. And you've got some academic credentials as well. You mentioned to me just before we started filming that you've recently completed your law degree, which I think is impressive. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about land use and transportation and renewable energy. And what I find, we've only just started getting going here, but I find fascinating is that you're not coming to the table with what would be a sort of stereotypical liberal, conservative sort of position. It sounds like you've got some really progressive ideas. You were assistant dean at UBC's Sauder School of Business. Did I got that right?
Yeah, you got that right.
Okay. So this is a leadership in a non-profit sector. And I have some Sauder School of Business graduates on my that work for me.
I'd be surprised if you didn't.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. What do you think is the most important thing that you would hope these students got from their experience there of working at Sauder School of Business, and why did you get involved with that?
It was such a great opportunity to work with a whole bunch of smart people and to learn from people. And it was also an opportunity for me to learn from young people and to kind of reconnect with people who are at different parts of their life. Yeah. So I think that, being one of the top research universities in the world is pretty attractive for anyone to work there or to actually attend as a student. So I had the opportunity to learn so much about so many different things, even as a staff member. The knowledge there and the knowledge sharing was extraordinary. I was very fortunate. I was involved in the renaming of the school, got to work with the Sauder family and go through the branding. So it was actually the Faculty of Commerce and Business Administration, which is a bit of a mouthful when I started. And so I was there for a very exciting time.
Yeah.
And And it's one of those accidental jobs. And I think a few of mine have been accidental jobs where I was in, I was at an event having a conversation with somebody and an opportunity was presented and had never anticipated that I would be there, but it was one of the best times of my life, and I learned so much there.
Let's dive into some of these topics that seem to be important to you and probably important for the people of West Vancouver, Capilano. And just to be clear, so your riding, which is the former riding of Ralph Sultan, who's retiring, has been a long-standing Liberal riding. Yes. So I would think it would be safe to say that while nothing's guaranteed in life, there's a very good probability that you should win if you put your effort in on this one. So I would like to think that, if we were to sit down in a couple months from now, I'd be calling you MLA of West Vancouver Capilano. Now, one of the subjects you wanted to talk about was land use. Can you dive into what are your kind of thoughts on land use? And I know there's been a lot of controversy over some of the land use in West Vancouver. You've also got 2 municipalities up there, right?
Yeah, well, 3. We got a city and 2 districts,
Right. So it's probably a bit more complex than some other municipalities.
Yeah.
So let's start off with that topic of land use and what are your thoughts?
Okay. When we talk about land use, it's really community planning. And when I was the CEO of the BC Real Estate Foundation, that was where I really had my eyes open about what good community planning can be and how can we be innovative about creating additional housing stock and affordable housing stock in mixed communities. And I know that all of the district and the city on the North Shore are very concerned about the ability for their young people to continue to stay there, businesses trying to attract employees who can't stay, who can't live there, teachers who can't live there, and it's all connected because transportation is the other thing I'm interested in. But
and we're gonna get in that.
Yeah,
sure.
So you've got to have people who are commuting, from Coquitlam to the North Shore every day.
Right.
Is that we've got to do something about the way that we're building our communities there, and we're integrating transportation and housing, and we're doing it in a way where it is affordable to a number of people. And when we talk about affordable, housing is on a continuum. And their Board of Trade did a report a few years ago that was called The Missing Middle.
Okay.
And I do think that that's one of the challenges, as well as the affordability at the kind of entry level, true affordability issue, is that how do you move people through that continuum of housing? And so there's not
as they
lot,
age, as they
go
from a single
but as
person,
they go from a young person to a married and to
children,
family and so I think there's a lot of focus on each end of that continuum, but not as much on how do we move people through and doing that through mixed communities. And so I don't know if that's clear enough in terms of what it is. And then the second part is on the North Shore. You were saying earlier, driving over there.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense for us not to have a fixed link as part of the SkyTrain system.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into the transportation in a moment. It's interesting because in each of the interviews we've done through this election series, housing comes up every time.
Absolutely,
And when I think about the interview I did with Sam Sullivan, and this is a big topic for his riding, and the BC NDP really tried to convince voters in the last election that the Liberal Party of British Columbia really did a terrible job of looking out for the average British Columbian, and that affordable housing got unaffordable for many people over the 16 years. Now, what was interesting in last night's political debate is Andrew Wilkinson said to John Horgan, "Look, under your watch over the last 3.5 years, the average rent for somebody in the Lower Mainland has gone up by over $2,000 a year." And John Horgan said no. And then I later looked at Justin McElroy, who's a really well-followed CBC reporter.
Your fact checker.
He's the fact checker. Yeah. Did you see it? And
I didn't know.
He fact checked it, and it was good. We'll put that up on the tweet that he put up. And he's like, well, actually, indeed, there was some kind of metric out there that's being, and it's not hearsay. It's like there's the data, and it has gone up. So, in my observation, and I have 28 people between the ages of 25 to 40 that work for me. So they're that middle group that you're talking about, Karin, and they haven't given me any indication that things are all of a sudden way more affordable in the last 3.5 years. We know that condo prices have gotten higher here in Vancouver. Housing prices have gone higher. So what I haven't got yet from anybody is like a clear view of like what their solution would be. It seems like always the same kind of thing. We just need more affordable housing, but can you give us some exact ideas of like, what are some things, if you become the MLA for West Vancouver Capilano, what are the kind of things you're going to advocate for your constituents to get done, like real tangible things that can get done
with respect to affordability of housing and housing stock,
especially in that middle group that you're talking about?
It's really important as the MLA that you work really closely with the district and the city, because housing is really, that's part of their community planning. And so working closely to be able to support them with programs and funding from the province, transportation from the province, those kinds of things. What I see and what concerns me in terms of housing, it's the quality of housing stock that's come online in the last few years. It's housing stock that is not, some of the modular housing We're talking about tents as being an alternative now to housing. So trying to find housing that can be family housing and community housing is important. When you start to put additional taxes and you start to put impediments and demotivators for developers and even nonprofit organizations to come in and add to that housing stock, you're not helping the situation. So I know there's an affordability issue, and you've got to look at how do we protect tenants with rent, but when you put a hard cap on rent, you've got to then look at, can we put a hard cap on our property taxes and our insurance taxes?
Right.
And can you have landlords who can fix the elevator and who can do so there's unintended consequences in some of these programs and policies that the NDP program or a government has brought in.
Sure.
And those unintended consequences are that people have stopped building that rental housing because it doesn't make sense to them financially,
right.
and it's got to.
So it sounds to me like you're an advocate for a market-based solution, that there's not enough supply. If there were more supply, then it would drop the cost of housing.
Yeah, that's a pretty black and white kind of easy way to approach it. And you can hear me I say to my friends, and if there was just more, it's basic economics.
Yeah.
You provide more supply, your price is going to go down.
Yeah.
It's not that simple with housing because when we're talking about housing, there's so many different components and so many different people. And so it's part of it is, I think it's not government's responsibility to actually, to a degree, to be the builders of that housing.
It is, or
but
it is not?
It is not.
It is not.
They're not developers, but they have an obligation to bring policies in place, or put policies in place that can encourage in a responsible way other organizations, be them nonprofits or social developers or whoever it is, to actually encourage them and incentivize them to make it make sense for them to add that housing stock.
Karin, can you take that argument one step further and say there's even it makes sense to even motivate for-profit builders?
Yeah,
to say,
absolutely.
like, if there's not enough 2 and 3 bedroom family, attached condos, to say, look, if you want to build a property, you want to get approval to build a 5-story building, and we know you're going to make more money if you make them all 1 bedrooms. But we need to have families that can live here. So here's the deal: if you build X number of rooms, you get to the front of the line as far as approvals are concerned, or you get some kind of tax rebate. No,
I think those are really important things to look at. Now, those kinds of decisions are generally made at the municipal level, but some municipalities are doing really creative things and, waiving the CAC requirements, so it makes economic sense for a developer to come in and build rental.
Right. So is this issue of affordable housing even a provincial issue?
It's everybody's issue because it relates to mental health, it relates to addiction, it relates to, so it's everybody's, but it depends which economic levers or which policies you can move, and it has to be the province working really, really closely with the municipalities on supporting each other and making sure it's rational and makes sense.
Yeah. Now, I've heard Selena Robinson, who's been the housing minister up until this election, on various podcasts like Mo Amir's, and she's a very well-spoken woman. She takes a lot of pride in what she sees as being a lot of success they've had. What are your views on how the NDP's track record's been in the last 3.5 years, as far as like in your backyard of West Vancouver, Capilano? Have you seen a big change in the affordable housing stock or availability of housing for either that middle group or the people that at the bottom end of the spectrum?
There's certainly some projects online right now which are really creative programs. They're municipal programs. Those are cities and the districts who have been working with different groups to come up with some solutions to this. From a provincial perspective, I haven't seen a lot of innovation in what we were talking about, is really motivating and being creative around providing that housing, and a real focus on the entry level or transition level piece of housing, which is really important, but it doesn't help open up that stock for other people by allowing you to move through that continuum.
Right. Are there any, to finish off on this topic, are there any creative ideas that you would like to bring to the Legislative Assembly? Maybe give an example, like for example, Whistler has this separate stock of real estate for local residents. It has a different pricing mechanism. I don't know what you call that. So do you have any ideas that you'd like to bring to the table that you could speak of right now?
Absolutely. There's so much opportunity for innovation. And when I was at the BC Real Estate Foundation, excuse me if I may have some of these details a little bit wrong, but there was a project that we were involved in that Van City Community Foundation did some funding on. A couple other groups got together. It was out in Abbotsford. And it was entry-level ownership. They were townhomes, but they also had rental suites as the lower suite. And so there was a covenant, a restriction on the title, is that suite had to remain as a rental suite for a period of time, and it was like 20 years or something. And then the mortgages were underwritten, or there was some granting available for people to move into ownership, and then they were allowed to obviously that rent would be paid to them to help subsidize their ownership.
Oh, interesting.
So doing something like that, building condos that have lock-off suites on them. And you've seen this out by UBC, not UBC, but SFU, where you've got a 2-bedroom condo or 1-bedroom condo, and you've got a lock-off suite, which might be a studio or a 1-bedroom, that you can either choose to have as part of the larger suite if your family's growing, if you need that space, or you use that as revenue, income generating, to help you pay your mortgage. And again, you're creating additional housing stock for students at SFU. So there's all kinds of things. I mean, these are just examples, and I'm not inventing this. I mean, there's a lot of examples of things that we can do out in the community. And I don't think we're quite as creative as we can be. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting on your last example there, Karin, about the lock-off suite that I've never heard of before. Technically, under and I know this legislation exceptionally well, under the BC speculation tax legislation, if you didn't rent that out for at least, I think it's like 6 months in the year, but I mean, I don't know quite well, but you would actually be deemed as having an empty property, and you would get taxed on that.
Not in that situation.
No?
Yeah, not in that situation, because somebody would be in the suite. So you've got it locked off, or you're sharing it, but there can be that. Actually, it's a great example of how you have to have rational policy making that will actually allow for creativity.
Right.
And I think sometimes in municipalities, and you don't have the ability to be able to look at a scenario on the basis of that scenario and apply a policy differently.
Right.
But in that situation, although it's a great example of where that might be a challenge, I don't think that would be an issue.
You don't think it would? Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, let's jump to the topic of transportation. And specifically, you mentioned this already, that you'd love to see a fixed link to the North Shore.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? And I mean, I love the idea conceptually. I don't live on the North Shore. I've got some good friends over there. But man, that must be a very expensive project to undertake. What are you thinking about here?
Well, I mean, all rapid transit, SkyTrain, light rail, it's all an expensive project to undertake. But if you look at the cost benefit of that in terms of getting cars off the road and creating better communities, it makes sense. And you can also, there's 5 different options right now that TransLink and the province are looking at in terms of how do we get to the North Shore.
Right.
But there's a number of other things they're looking at, and obviously the UBC line, but the cost of the UBC line versus the cost of doing light rail to the North Shore. Now, I'm not an expert at this, but I've been reading a lot about it, is that it's less expensive to do light rail to the North Shore because we can use existing infrastructure. It makes more sense because of the flow of employment and people just even accessing the North Shore to open that transportation corridor up the sea to sky.
Right.
To help the businesses, to help affordability. So it makes sense.
So what do you envision? Like, is this like a train line that attaches to the Lionsgate Bridge on the side of it and scoots across, or is this a tunnel?
Well, I'm not an engineer, but that doesn't sound like it would work. No, there's options, and there's transportation specialists all over the world, and we've got great ones here at UBC and SFU who can take a look at these things and say what makes the most sense. So I can't tell you what that looks like. I can tell you it sounds like from, even there's a recent op-ed in the North Shore News talking about the ability to bring light rail transit over on the existing train line line that comes across by the Second Narrows Bridge.
Okay.
So they all have to be looked at. But so I want something, though. There has to be something.
Right.
For so many reasons, there has to be something. We're disconnected to the rest of the Lower Mainland.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. So when it comes to this fixed link, do you think the possibility of having a tunnel is in the mix at all, or are we? I think light rail would be the way to go, probably.
Boy, I think tunneling would be really expensive, and I don't know that you've got the soil stability on the bottom to be able to sustain that and make that make sense.
Yeah.
So maybe, I mean, people like tunnels because you don't see them.
Yeah.
But it's got to make economic sense, and I actually think there's something that really beautiful about transit and being able to see it and being above ground. So I don't know.
Well, the NDP and the Liberal Party have been going back and forth in the Massey Tunnel for a long time, and I know that the Liberals are, set their heels in on a bridge. Yeah. Whereas the NDP stated that they are keen on just retrofitting or expanding the tunnel, but it seems like nothing's being done for those folks down there. The transportation issue is a big ticket item. Yeah, it is. Like it's are you a big fan of what do they call the tariffs when you go over a bridge?
Tolls.
The
tolls.
I don't know why
well, that's a sticky subject to talk about, but other cities do it and it makes sense. But I also know that it's a disproportionate burden on people who are traveling further every day. Yeah. It also costs them more to maintain their vehicle and so I don't like the idea of tolls that have that impact on people. Sure. But I do think it's worth looking at congestion taxes and various things for those people who are coming into the city. Now, this is me talking about this. I think there are opportunities to look at, again, behavioral modification. What can we do that will get people out of their cars and will get them on transit? Yeah. So it's got to be, A, you've got to have transit to get them into, and then B, you can use some of these encouragements to make it make sense for people to get into transit. Right. But I do think that burden has got to be shared equally.
Yeah. Is on the North Shore where you live, Karin, is your bus system TransLink, or is it, because isn't there like
We've got the blue bus system in West Vancouver, and then we're
and who runs that? Is that
it's the District of West Vancouver.
Okay. Yeah. Is that problematic at all for the that run separately?
To be honestly, I don't know. I haven't, as a transit user, I haven't found that it is, but I'm sure that there's some economies of scale that are lacking, as in many things, but I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Let's jump to the next topic, which is renewable energy, because it sounds like this is something you're also passionate about. Yeah. I'll start by stating that when I had Sonia Firstino on, I said, Sonia, what's interesting? With the Liberal Party of BC, you know what you get. They're pro pipelines. They want to expand TMX. They're pro LNG Canada. With the Green Party, you know what you get. You're not pro on any of this stuff. Yeah. But the NDP, man, they seem to change that story constantly, going back and forth. They're really before they came into power, they were against LNG Canada. Yep. Now they're in favor of it. Yep. And then you come to sit down with me, and you're part of a party that's pro pipelines, but it sounds like you're really big on renewable energy. So how do you fit all that in?
Well, if you talk about if you look at what today's BC Liberals are talking about, it is that transition economy. Okay. Is we've got to be able to support the people that are in the oil and gas sector and LNG, but the only way you're actually going to make change is to be able to invest heavily in renewables, heavily in the clean tech sector, and that's what we're talking about doing. Okay. And those are also, I go back to how do we get people out of cars, and we need to make that investment in clean tech, and the BC Liberals understand that and have committed to that being a part of their energy platform and their environmental platform.
So what kind of renewable energy projects would you be a big fan of? Which were the kind of things you would want to promote if you were an MLA in Victoria?
Yeah. Well, again, I always have to defer to the specialists to tell me what makes the most sense. But again, we just have these amazing resources. We can do tidal power because we have this astounding coastline. Right. Wind power, geothermal power. I know that there's, coming back to housing too and being innovative in housing, geothermal heating for apartment buildings, for tall high rises. Right. We're seeing it happen, and it makes great sense. So there's a number of things things that we can do here to access power. But then the other thing we need to look at is how do we supply and provide power to other parts of the world. And I think that we can be leaders in the technology around clean tech. Yeah. And investing in that and supporting that sector, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
But you don't turn off the tap on one sector one day. You've got to, and if a party comes in and says, that's it, we're closing everything down, there's no LNG, nothing will ever happen. You've got to be willing to have that transition and make that a long-term plan.
Yeah. Well, Andrew Wilkinson did say on the leaders debate last night, he said, BC has the opportunity to be an energy powerhouse, and not just through fossil fuels, but through a variety of ways in which to generate energy. Site C Dam, are you a big fan of that one? Do you like Site C Dam?
I like the idea of hydro.
Yeah. As we wrap this up, I'd like to ask you the question of, what does winning in this election mean for you and for the party? There's a very high probability. I mean, this is why John Horgan has called. And he's saying that he's called this election because there's never a bad time to ask people when to elect their representatives. Right. He's saying that there's not a stable government. Sonia spoke about that.
Yeah.
And so he's done this because the NDP are looking good in the polls. And I think they're almost even looking better right now. Unfortunately, I think the Liberal Party, my observation, hasn't really delivered to the point that they should. Now, the jury's still out. There's an election here and there's lots to go. But let's assume that we have a minority government a majority government by the NDP,
right,
and a group of how many MLAs left in the Liberal Party. What does winning look like for you?
I think being at the table, because my daughter always sings that Hamilton song, you gotta be in the room where it happens. I think being at the table and being in the room where it happens, regardless of who the governing party is really important. I think there's huge value there. Being a critic is hugely valuable.
Sure.
So there are opportunities to contribute in different ways.
Yeah. If you could be a critic, which portfolio would you what would you love to pick up?
Oh, I want to be a critic for everything. I don't know. I work at what's going to benefit the party and where they think. I've got diverse experience in different areas, MCFD, environment, housing. Yeah. So, but I would be very concerned about a majority government with the NDP. I'm very concerned about trying to build our economy back up through taxation. I don't think there's it's business support or social services and mental health supports. Those things work really, really closely together. You don't have to take away from one to give it to the other.
Right.
And the burdens that they have added to the average taxpayer and small businesses over the last 3 years, if they continue doing that, we're going to stall the economy and we're not going to be able to have that growth that we need to be able to recover from this pandemic.
Right.
And the government was functioning fine. It's probably the most collaborative it's ever been. And the NDP, or the Liberals and the Green Party, weren't up in arms, weren't out in the media, weren't being critical, because they were doing what they should have been doing, which is supporting and working collaboratively in the best interest of British Columbians. And John Horgan took advantage of that.
Yeah. Well, that last comment I completely endorse, because as a outsider who is pretty neutral on this, I mean, I just thought to myself, like, you've got two parties who've really put partisanship aside to focus on COVID. And then all of a sudden we get told out of the blue that no, we need an election right now, when there's an election coming next year.
Yeah.
When I had Sam in here, and Sam Sullivan was referencing the fact that he feels like there's one of the things that the NDP lacks is just a pure curiosity in economics and the way business works. And my comment to him was, and I think this is a factor in deciding when to have this election now, is that publicly funded, or public institutions like the government the government of British Columbia only publish their financial statements once a year. And those financials for BC, the fiscal year end is March 31st. So we as British Columbians don't actually get to see what the government has spent their money on until candidly around June of the fall of whatever year that is. So we know what this government has spent up to March 31st of 2020, when COVID had just started hitting North America. So I do feel like one of the things I do question is, was this election called because if we were having this election this time next year, there'd been 6 months for the public and opposition parties to digest what this government's spending their money on. And that's one of the fears I have.
My expectation was that this election would be called prior to the budget in February. Because I think that that's exactly what you're saying, is that the further we go into this, the more those cracks are going to start to show.
Right.
There's this halo around Bonnie Henry in terms of how this government has managed this pandemic. That halo will remain around her. But in terms of the NDP's participation in that and what they've done and what they've contributed, it will get, we'll start to really see those cracks as we move towards when they bring the budget out and what are they committing to and what have they been spending. Yeah.
Right. So if people want to get involved, if they want to help you out, how do they get involved?
They can find me online, Google me. Well, don't Google me right now. But yeah, go to our campaign page. And,
you got a Facebook page?
Yeah, we got a Facebook page. Go there at Karin Kirkpatirck Liberals and just message us. And we'd love to have more people participating and being involved. And but it's you only have a week and a half left. So, but we can still use that help and support. Sign up, become a BC Liberal Party member. Feel free to donate to us, and if there's questions for me, just in terms of those things that I stand for, email, and we're doing our best to have me answer everybody, but there's been a lot of emails in the last couple of days.
If people are filling out their mail-in ballots, how do they fill it out? They can either write Liberal.
They can write the party name, so they can write Liberal, or they can write the candidate name.
And your name, just so for listeners to know, it's spelled Karin, not Karin, not Karen.
Not Karen. It's Kirkpatrick. There's a lot of I's and a lot of K's in there. It's hard to get through it all. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm really excited for you.
Thank
you. And I really appreciate you coming down, especially considering all the drama that you probably had to deal with since last Friday. I'm really impressed that you
I'd rather face it and talk about it.
Yeah. I think you faced it and spoke about it quite well. So, Karin, I really appreciate being on the show. You're the representative for the BC Liberal Party for West Vancouver Capilano. Best of luck on this election. Thank you for being on.
Thanks so much, Andrew.